Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Beneath the Red Star podcast, a Russian history podcast for normal people. And welcome to the second episode of the series. I hope you enjoyed the first one. If you didn't, please go ahead and write any of your complaints on a $50 bill and mail them to me. I will absolutely get on those right away. My name is Kyle, and I am your host. Today, we're going to continue on the trend. Well, I guess it's really hard to say it's a trend since this is the second episode ever, but the trend of how Russia became the way it is. This is probably going to be the last episode on how Russia became the way it is, kind of the founding of Russia. And really what that has to do is, I just kind of want to do other stuff too. This podcast is not bound by time or space, really, just as long as it falls within the time or space that Russia existed. So the next episode after this is not necessarily going to be from the same time period. Yeah, the same time period. I promise you, I can speak English. So yeah, it's not necessarily going to be from the same time period, but for now, we're going to keep it medieval. Actually, we're going to kick it back even a little bit further than what we were talking about with Ivan, which, mind you, was in the 1500s. This time, we're going to go back to the year 988. That is the main year that we're going to be discussing. And that is going to be the year that Vladimir I, or Vladimir the Great, Christianized not only himself, but Kievan Rus, which Kievan Rus is one of the predecessor states to the modern Russian state that we know and live in constant fear of today. That modern Russian state that we're so familiar with is an Eastern Orthodox state. Or, well, not really in the sense, like, it's not necessarily like a state religion, but when we think of Russia kind of writ large, Eastern Orthodoxy is an incredible part of the identity of Western Russia, kind of. I really don't know how to put this in a way that's not really kind of gross, because Russia is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, so to say that Eastern Orthodoxy is, say, the religion of Russia, both is kind of correct, but also is very reductive, because as of now, it is believed that roughly about 70% of religious people within Russia are Eastern Orthodox. But what that means is, of course, a good number of people are not Eastern Orthodox. So I always feel weird saying that Russia is an Eastern Orthodox country because so many people within it are not. But to understand Russian society and Russian culture, particularly kind of a Western metropolitan, I guess, Russian culture, you gotta be down with Eastern Orthodoxy, because to this day, it has quite a bit of sway within the politics and society. So, where this begins is, like I said, in 988 with Vladimir I, or Vladimir the Great. And there are two stories of how this came to be. One is the boring historical one that nobody cares about, but is actually what happened. And then there's the other one that's really fun that everybody knows because, you got told it at some point and it's a little bit more exciting. Really, actually, I find the historical one to be quite a bit more exciting. It has quite a bit more action to it in reality. But, the kind of folklore tale is generally the one that gets around. And a good example of that is, that's what I heard first. The kind of folklore version is the one that I was first familiar with until I started doing research for this very episode, where I started finding hey, maybe that's not quite right. So we're going to go through both and we're going to discuss how they are different. So let's go ahead and just jump right into that. So where we're going to start is not actually in 988, but actually in the 12th century, roughly 150 years after the events of Vladimir's life. And what we're talking about isn't actually what happened, it's the book describing what happened. And that would be the Provyest Vremyanych Let. So what that means in English is the tale of bygone years. I'm not going to call it the Provyest Vremyanych Let or the tale of bygone years from now on. I'm just going to call it the Provyest, which is oftentimes how you see it referred to in writings about the book and about this story. So the Provyest is a collection of works by different clergymen, educated folk, monks, priests, whatnot, about 150 years after the baptism of Rus, as it is generally referred to as. And so you might be thinking, hey, that's a good long ways after. Why did they take so long to write that? Well, Basically, what it comes down to is this is propaganda. This is church propaganda. Oftentimes, this would be referred to as, say, a hagiography, which is, in the Catholic tradition, basically just a writing about the lives of saints. And it tells why this person is a saint, why they're so amazing, why God loves them, and why you should too. And so that's more or less what this is. While this is not necessarily a hagiography and definitely kind of poses more and passes more as a historical text, I think that we really have to understand it as hagiography. Because one, Vladimir is a saint. So, I mean, in a way, it quite literally is a hagiography. But also because the style of it is very similar to other hagiographies. It very much so reads like a story that you would think of being a church history. And again, it, in kind of a way, it really is just a hagiography, but it meets a lot of the same kind of criteria and ultimately is used quite a bit like any other hagiography, particularly in order to create a narrative. And the church controls the narrative. Of course they do. They're an incredibly powerful entity at this time within Kievan Rus, within the Russian society, and within the government as well. The religious powers that be are very closely related to and oftentimes intertwined with government authority at that time. So of course they control it, and it's a story about the church, so again, of course they control it. It's their own story. They're gonna, take the narrative however they want. So they're going to spin that narrative in a way that shows Vladimir is being great and wise and powerful and amazing, and everybody should love him because God loves him and you love God, so everybody loves everybody. Vladimir's great. At least we all can agree on that. And, well, why, again, does that matter 150 years later? Well, because this is the man who introduced the institution of Eastern Orthodoxy to Russia. So if he's great and he brings in this great religion, hey, guess what? Now the state can point at the church and the church can point at the state and go, man, I'm really glad that we all can work together. We all just fucking rule. Isn't that right? So you kind of have to think of it a little bit as propaganda. Because, well, it is propaganda. It's the version that the church wants you to know. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter when this is written. It doesn't really matter that it's written 150 years later or if it was written the very next day, because the importance isn't necessarily what's actually happening or why things happen. It's more so just that it fits a certain narrative, and that narrative is the church fucking rules, Vladimir fucking rules, we're all great. You need to pay your taxes now, because if you don't, God's mad, and my dudes here with the swords, they're going to fuck you up. And with that in mind, we can now dive into the Provyest. Please do not mind the tinkling sound. I'm not sure how well that came through. That's my cat, Charlotte. She's in here with me because I had to get up at one point to go check something. So again, sorry if there's a bit of a cut in the audio about, 20 seconds ago, and as soon as I opened the door, she barged in. I mean, straight up knocked the door out of my hand to get in here. So she's in here now. So please say hi to Charlotte. She welcomes you all. And now that Charlotte has graced us with her presence, we can get back to the story. So the Provyest is the story of how this happened, basically just the churched up version. So the story begins in 986, and basically Vladimir's like, man, I really, really like the idea of having a state religion. And to be fair, this is something that every version of the telling of this story agrees on. Vladimir wants a state religion, and a big reason is he wants to centralize power. We'll get to that a little bit more in the kind of historically accurate tale, but it is important to note that this is something that pretty much everyone agrees on. So Vladimir's like, man, I really want to have a centralized authority. And look at all these countries around me. Look at the Byzantines. Look at the Holy Roman Empire. Look at all these Muslim countries. Look at all these Christian countries. Look at all these other cool countries out there. They're so much cooler and stronger and more powerful than me. And why is that? They have a centralized government with a centralized state religion. I need me one of those. So Vladimir sends out an invitation for wise men to come to Kiev and tell him about their religions. So I am certain that there are more, but really the important thing is that Muslim Bulgars, Catholic Germans, Jewish Khazaris, and Greek Orthodox men, I'm not really sure what the term would be, Greek Orthodox wise men come and they basically give him a show and say, hey man, here's our pitch. You should go with us. Our interpretation of God, that's the best one. I'm certain you'll like it. And at the end of the day, Vladimir's like, you know what? Those Greek Orthodox dudes, what they were talking about, I don't know, they just got it. In particular, it is said that Vladimir really enjoyed an icon that was shown to him by the Greek Orthodox wise men of the final judgment. This will be important because another thing that really all interpretations of the story agree on is that Vladimir was really taken away, just completely blown away by the wealth on display by the Byzantines. Real in this version, kind of wealth of God, like, oh my God, these guys are so fancy. It must be because God loves them. In the other version, it's a little bit more like, hey man, these guys got gold. I want some of that. So, unfortunately, Vladimir doesn't make a decision. He's kind of wishy-washy and he sends these folks away and says, thanks for your time. I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye. And he goes, man, I still am no closer to getting me a state religion. So he brings in his boyars, he brings in his princes, and he says, folks, what the hell are we going to do? I have no idea. These all seem like pretty good options, but I kind of really like those Greek dudes. But I'm lost. I don't know. What do we do here? So his guys say, you know what? Why don't we go see them where they're at? Let's go to their places and say, hey man, show us how you do this for real. You're not going to be performing in front of the Grand Prince. You're going to do this for real in your home, and we're going to get the full experience. And Vladimir says, rad, sick, let's do it. So he sends 10 representatives. First, they go visit the Bulgars, then they visit the Germans, and last they visit the Byzantines. They never actually go to meet the Jewish Khazaris, and I've read that that's probably because at that time there was no real Khazari state, and so, maybe not the best thing to do, just kind of send representatives of one government to some random government, like, hey, we're just here to hang with this one religious group. But also, I don't know, man. This is absolutely the kind of snub that, like, an old hagiographical text that the Russians wrote would be like, man, we're not going to talk about the Jews. Get those guys out of here. But either way, he goes to meet the Muslims, the Catholics, and then finally the Orthodox. And much like the first time, all of his representatives go, holy cow. These Orthodox dudes out in the Byzantine Empire, these guys know where it's at. And again, they're particularly blown away with the kind of wealth and grandeur of the church services, of also the churches themselves, just everything. I mean, they're in Constantinople, which is, at this time, the Russians call Tsargrad, the city of the emperor, basically, the city of the czar. So, they're setting kind of a bit of a high bar, and apparently it meets it. They're like, wow, this is sick. So they go back to Vlad, they tell him, and he goes, that's kind of what I was feeling the first time, but I'm still really not feeling it. I just don't know. So a few years later, in 988, Vlad finds himself embroiled in a war with the Byzantines, which, I don't know, for a guy who wants their religion, maybe not the best thing to do, but I mean, I guess it turns out all right in the end. He's attacking the town of Kherson, as so many different Russian rulers do, apparently, and so he is surrounding the city, and he makes a deal with God, as so often these stories go. And he says, God, if I am able to cut off the water to this city, and I'm able to take it, I will convert. I have been shown the ways of orthodoxy, and I will convert. Well, lo and behold, he does exactly that. Not convert, but he cuts off the water and he takes the city. And then, for the third and final time, he flounders. Vladimir says, man, I knew that I kind of liked this orthodoxy stuff, but I don't know, it's just whatever. So then he says, hey, Byzantine Emperor, yeah, you, I got your city here. If you want it back, why don't you send me your sister and we'll get married? And then I promise we're going to convert. And well, the Byzantine Emperor, as the holy man that he is at that time, says, I'm sorry, my dear sister, but you must go and save the souls of all these Slavs. And so the Princess Anna goes to Kherson and meets Vladimir, where she finds a blind man. And, well, why did he go blind? I don't know. I guess because God took his eyes, because at the beginning of the story, he wasn't blind. But Anna says to him, hey, what will make you not blind? Jesus. If you get some Jesus in you, you won't be blind no more. And at this point, Vladimir goes, all right, I'm not a big fan of being blind. And all this other stuff I've seen about Orthodoxy has been pretty sick. So let's do it. And, well, guess what? As soon as he's baptized, he can see again. And that's more or less the story. There are some different variations in different texts. For example, there is a variation at the Battle of Kherson where instead of him making a deal with God by himself, a wise man comes to Vladimir and says, if you make a deal with God, basically you'll win the battle. And what's interesting about this is it's very similar to the story of Melvian Bridge, which is a tale from I can't remember how long ago because it's in the Roman Empire, and as much as I am a history guy, I just don't really care or like the Roman Empire that much, so I guess sue me. But it's the story of how the Emperor Constantine became a Christian. And he was the very first Roman emperor to be Christian and to kind of Christianize, or as often is said, baptize the Roman Empire. And it goes down much the same way. Basically, there's going to be this big old battle, and Constantine either sees a sign, like literally a sign, like a cross in the sky, or he has a dream before the battle. He dedicates the battle to God, wins, and goes, man, I should really get on the God train. So, I don't know, pretty similar, almost identical in a lot of ways. And that's done on purpose, I believe, because, all of the kind of clergy people would know that story at the time, and it builds legitimacy. It goes, hey man, Vladimir, just like Constantine. Russia, just like Rome. We're building legitimacy for church and state, just the way we like it. Now, there you have it. Russia is now a Christian nation. After this, Vladimir goes around and starts baptizing people left and right at sword point. He baptizes 2 whole cities at once. Wow, I really cannot talk, excuse me. He baptizes Novgorod and Kiev in one fell swoop, and there you go. Bingo bango, Christian country. And this is the story that you oftentimes hear. Like, this was the story that I first heard. When I heard it was a little bit different. It was actually kind of the other way around. That ultimately what made Vladimir change his mind was all of the wise men came to him at the very end, and he had kind of narrowed it down to either Orthodoxy or Islam. And basically, the Greek Orthodox guys were like, hey man, you can drink in our religion. He goes, all right, sold. The rest of y'all, get out. So definitely a different story, but you can see it has a lot of, similar beats. And this story is pretty common. Like, you'll still hear it told quite a bit. It is the official story of the church, of how things happened. And to be fair, there's not actually a particularly, bad reason for that either. It's not like, oh wow, they've been hiding the real reason or something. No, the Provyest is one of, if not the best sources of what happened at this time. A lot of the kind of scholarly interpretation is just that. It's an interpretation. People are looking at older texts that came out quite a bit after the fact and going, well, these other things happened at the same time, so we think those are related, and, this is why we believe this or that. They are educated guesses, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, there's quite a bit of inferences. So let's go ahead and get into those inferences. Let's get into the scholarly version of what happened. So this time, the story is not going to begin in 986. Rather, it's going to begin in 957. So just about exactly 30 years prior. And what's happening here is the Princess Olga of Kiev is being baptized. She is the, the Regent of Kiev. Excuse me, I am not a big knower of things about Orthodox Christianity, so I had to write these terms down, and I don't know, I just kind of lost that one for a second. So, she is the Regent of Kiev, which is kind of like a bishop or archbishop at the time, especially because at this time there is no Russian Orthodoxy. There is no real Christianity as a centralized entity in Russia. Russia's still pagan. Kievan Rus is a pagan society. And so it's kind of interesting that you have this lady here who is the Regent of Kiev. Who is this lady? Well, she is Vladimir's grandmother. So it kind of makes sense that, maybe there weren't a bunch of wise men. Maybe there wasn't a globe-trotting trek where Vladimir is sending dudes all over the planet to learn about religions. Instead, maybe old Granny Dearest is whispering in his ear going, hey man, you want to centralize, you want to take control, you want to have power like all these other countries. Well, what do they have? They got God. And you know what? That honestly makes a lot of sense to me. Because, again, everyone agrees he wanted to make a centralized, strong country. And he thought that an important part of this was having a centralized religion that could back the state and that the state could back. Makes a lot of sense that his grandma's like, you know who you should go with? Mine. Seems pretty cut and dry. But there's also other reasons that it seems that Vlad may have been interested in Eastern Orthodoxy. One of the big ones is he doesn't want to be tied down. So one of the issues is, at the end of the day, he kind of goes, yeah, Christianity makes the most sense because of where I am. Everyone around me is, kind of rapidly Christianizing, and I don't want to say go with Islam or Judaism because I'm going to end up being enemies with everybody around me. Again, this is kind of an inference, but makes a lot of sense. So ultimately, he comes down to the idea of, we're going to go with Christianity. Jesus is going to help us take the wheel here. So we can either go with Catholicism or we can go with Orthodoxy. The issues with these are, well, really at the end of the day, it's the same issue. I'm going to end up being kind of part of other people's games here. If I'm Vladimir and I go with, say, Christianity of the Catholic variety, well, great. Now I got to deal with the Pope. I got to deal with the Holy Roman Empire. It's a lot. And then same thing if I go with Eastern Orthodoxy. Well, and then I got to deal with the Orthodox, oh God, I completely forgot the term. You'll have to excuse me. The Patriarch, the Patriarch in Tsargrad, in Byzantium, Constantinople, other names for the same city. And then I got to deal with the Byzantine Empire. And what it seems like is he did the math and he goes, I think I might be able to take the Byzantines if I had to. I can't take the HRE. I can't take the Pope. I can take the Byzantines. And so that seems to be kind of what he did. He goes, you know what? If I got to bend the knee to somebody, I'll go with the Byzantines because these guys, they kind of weak. And he's not wrong, because in the year 986, the Byzantines are having a bit of a rebellion in Asia Minor. And, well, Vlad sees a bit of an opportunity here. And he goes to the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, a guy named Basil II. He's not a leaf. And he says, hey, man, you look like you're in a bit of a rough spot here. I could send some dudes, and these dudes could help you, end this rebellion. And to really sweeten the deal, I'll convert. I'll straight up do it. Tell me when and where, tell me how, and we'll get her done. I will convert. I'll convert the entire country. We'll do it lickety-split. And Basil's like, okay, I don't know, man. You're kind of like barbarians, and you kind of scare me, and you're right there on the edge of our border. Like, why should I do this? And he's like, well, it's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. We're going to be best buds, and I'll help you with these guys over here, and we'll win. And he finally goes, okay, Vlad, we'll do it. But Vladimir had one more stipulation. He goes, I get to marry your sister Anna, which, as you may recognize, is the same in both versions of the story. Maybe happening a little bit at different times, but, it's still in there. And Basil ultimately goes, fine. Yeah, sure, whatever. I need the people. I can't do this. So 6,000 troops are marched down from Kievan Rus to the Byzantine Empire. And, well, they really help. I mean, it is kind of said that these guys ultimately are what save this, or not save the rebellion, they stopped the rebellion. These are the guys who put the rebellion down almost like completely without the Byzantines. Now, again, of course, this is information being taken from Russian sources 150 years after the actual battle, so of course they're gonna say, our dudes, oh man, without us, those guys were dead in the water. They couldn't do shit. So, again, grains of salt. But it is pretty well known that, yeah, they were instrumental to defeating the rebellion, that the Byzantines were not able to do it before, and of course, it is arguable maybe to what degree that they helped, but they did do quite a bit. Well, one of the ways that we know that they were pretty powerful is, after the rebellion, Vlad comes to Basil, excuse me, I'm going to call him Basil, I swear to God, I'm never going to stop, to Basil, and he says, all right, we're good here, man. If you give me your sister, I can convert, and we can become friends. And Basil says, no dice, no sister, no more. you can take your guys and you can get. And Vlad says, that's really stupid. Like, that's a bad idea. These guys just saved your bacon, and they're all in your country. Like, is this really what you want to do? And before Basil could really give a response, these troops march on Kherson. And much like in the story from the Pravyest, in 988, Vlad attacks and takes Kherson. And, well, this time there is no, oh man, I'm gonna, dedicate the battle to God. I'm gonna blah, blah, blah. No, this time he goes, I took your city. Give me your sister, man. We had a deal. And, well, unfortunately for Basil, and I don't know about Anna, I don't really know what happens, how her relationship with Vlad goes, but I mean, as a general rule, being married off isn't a good thing, so unfortunately for her too, Basil accepts. He goes, okay, fuck it, whatever, man, just leave my country alone, please, like, we've had enough. And so, that's what happens. Vlad goes back to Kiev, he takes Anna with him, and he converts in the same year, in 988. And then, again, he goes and he baptizes everyone at sword point. Most importantly, he baptizes the cities of Novgorod and Kiev, which are the two biggest, most important, powerful cities within Kievan Rus. And what he does is he brings Russia onto the stage kind of with the big dogs. He now is taking part in international politics with all the big guys. And this is particularly not great because as soon as he does this, he immediately enters into the East-West beef that exists between the Byzantines and the Holy Roman Empire, which is kind of what he wanted to stay out of because, remember the whole thing is like, I don't want to get caught up in all of y'all's shit. I don't want to be subservient to someone else. My plan is to use this position as the guy who Christianizes Russia as kind of the founder of the Russian Orthodox faith to create legitimacy for myself. Remember, I got all the big churches now. They're all fancy with gold. That's my gold. You know me. I'm the cool dude who builds the churches. I'm the cool dude who's bringing all these religious guys who are saying what I want them to say. Like, that's what I want. I don't need any of this international political trouble. But international political trouble's what you get when you start playing, I don't know, the game of Risk, I guess. Because, now he's got to put his little horsies out on the field, and this game's going to last like 20 days, and then everyone's going to get bored and go home. Because I don't know about you, I don't think I've ever played a game of Risk that's actually ever ended. I think everyone just gave up at one point and said, okay, I think that's enough. But for Vladimir, unfortunately, Risk goes on. And the risk is, well, how do I maintain an independent country while not pissing off everyone around me? And in reality, you don't. That's just kind of not how this works. And the next couple 100 years, or really like the next 1,000 years or so, is going to be the story of Kievan Rus, the Princedom of Muscovy, the Russian Empire, all the various different Russian states, whichever one you like, having to navigate the fact that, oh boy, everyone around us is a different religion and we're kind of always at war with them. And not to say like, oh, this is, woe is Russia, like, oh my god, all the horrible people from the other religions are just ganging up on them. Like, these guys certainly just murder the shit out of their neighbors too, for literally the exact same reason. But at this point, Kievan Rus can't really go toe-to-toe with its neighbors in the way that, the Russian Empire would be in, like, a few hundred years. So this is a very precarious spot that Vladimir is in, and it's kind of interesting because there is a debate of how much autonomy does Vladimir actually have? How much of the decision to become an Eastern Orthodox country is one of him giving up power? Arguably so that he can be part of a stronger entity, that being the kind of sphere of influence of the Byzantine Empire. And there's kind of arguments for and against, and really I kind of seem to believe that this was not something that happened, that Vladimir's kind of, I want to say like a new country, but it's really not. I guess his new Christian country seems to be based more or less on the idea of being independent. Vladimir chose his own religious clergy to come from the Byzantine Empire. He showed in the field that he was more than capable of defeating them militarily and outmaneuvering them politically. And then as well, the kind of state building that he does at home shows that, at least in my opinion, he wants to be independent and seems like he can kind of do it on his own. And what I'm talking about is immediately after he becomes Christian and Christianizes the country, the very first thing he does is he changes his name to Vasily, which Vasily is basically just the Slavic name Basil, which again, Basil is the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. He's more or less saying, I'm an emperor. I'm a strong guy that you have to listen to, that you have to respect. And then he immediately starts these large-scale construction projects of building churches. Again, flexing wealth, flexing power, and not just internally, but externally. It shows to the folks, both in the Catholic world, but also within the Orthodox world, I am strong. I can do this. You guys don't really have control over me. And so I think that there's a pretty good argument that, he's got this kind of in the bag. He's perfectly capable of doing it on his own, and he is not somebody that the Byzantines are necessarily whispering in his ear. I imagine to some degree, of course, they are, because they are, at the end of the day, the center of Eastern Orthodoxy, and so the folks from there are probably absolutely being like, hey man, the guys in Constantinople think this or that, but as we've seen, he can kind of kick their ass. Like, if push comes to shove, Vladimir is not afraid to fight the Byzantines, and he can win. So I can't get too far into it, because that's not necessarily really what this story is about here that I'm telling today, but I think that at this time, it's kind of, to me anyways, clear that Vladimir's really kind of doing the thing that he set out to do. He is creating the Russian state, or at least he's creating the first components of the Russian state that we will see being used almost, say, 500 years later, almost 600 years later, with Ivan IV that we saw in the previous episode. Because remember, for Ivan, there's a lot of the same issues of, I want to further control people through a greater entwining of the church and the state. And so, basically, what we have here is the first instance of that. This is the very first man who says, God, I really want to control these folks, but it's really hard because, I don't have people who can, spread my messages everywhere. And that's because at this time, everybody's pagan. There's no, grand pagan in Kiev. And Vladimir, who, by all accounts, was a pretty avid pagan, he ultimately says, I need a centralized religion. One where the kind of administration is one that is tied to the government. And that's exactly what he does. And we will see this continue time and time again throughout Russian, both imperial and pre-Russian imperial history, where the office of whoever's in charge, whether that be, say, the Grand Prince or the Tsar, is using the church to impose their will upon the people. So that's where this starts. And now, here we are, 1,200 years later almost, and it's more or less the same way today. Russia is not necessarily the same kind of, state-church relationship that it was back then, but to this very day, Vladimir Putin goes very much so out of his way to show how into Eastern Orthodoxy he is, and he uses it quite a bit for Russian politics and his position on the world stage, particularly to appeal to Russian conservatives and American conservatives who are really, really into Christians, even if these Christians were people that 100 years ago they themselves would not have considered Christians. But hey, whatever, I guess. So that's the story of how Russia became Christian. This one's a little bit shorter. Sorry about that. I'm going to generally try to aim for a 45 minute to an hour mark. But this time I was trying to do something a little bit different. I was trying to make it a little bit more conversational, a little bit more ad-libbed, I guess. This is the second episode that I am going to be putting out, but this is the third episode that I have recorded. So, sorry if I keep saying things that maybe make it sound like there's more than 2 episodes. They're just, going to be in a different order. And for each of the first 3 episodes, I have kind of done a little bit of variation on how I've recorded them, how I've kind of been, my presence, whatnot, because I just kind of want to get a feel for how these things are. So this one is definitely going to be a little bit more conversational. That was the plan anyways, a little bit more ad-libbed. Because for the others, I had a script, and I went down through the script, and it was much more structured. Whereas this one is a little bit more just kind of, I put bullet points, and I just tried to connect them, with put the high points there, the things that you need to know, and then fill in the rest. So let me know if you guys like that. Let me know if you didn't. You kind of, I hope, know the drill. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think. But for now, I just want to say thank you all for listening. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you all have a great day, and I will catch you for the next one. Bye-bye.